2016. The EU has consistently reiterated its strong opposition to Israel's settlement policy and actions taken in that context. The EU calls on Israel to hold continued settlement expansion, including in and around East Jerusalem, and especially in sensitive areas such as E1, which severely threatens the two-state solution and seriously jeopardizes the possibility of Jerusalem serving as the future capital of both states. Actions such as evictions, forced transfers, including in Massapriata, demolitions, including of EU-funded projects, and confiscations of homes will only escalate an already tense environment. Settlements are illegal under international law. The EU has also made clear that it will not recognise any changes to the pre-1967 borders, including with regard to Jerusalem, other than those agreed by the parties. We expect both parties to act in accordance with international law. The EU is deeply concerned by the deteriorating situation on the ground and increased violence in the occupied West Bank and calls for efforts to de-escalate. Israel must stop settlement expansion, prevent settler violence, and ensure that perpetrators are held accountable. Furthermore, the EU stresses the need for language on the holy sites of Jerusalem to reflect the importance and historical significance of the holy sites for the three monotheistic religions and to respect religious and cultural sensitivities. Chair, strong, inclusive, accountable and functioning democratic Palestinian institutions based on the respect for the rule of law and human rights are vital for the two-state solution. The EU urges all Palestinian factions to engage in good faith in the reconciliation process, to adhere to previous agreements, renounce violence and terrorism, and recognise Israel's right to exist and to commit to democratic principles, including the rule of law. Civil society must be allowed by all parties to carry out its important task freely, while freedom of expression must be upheld. Chair, the EU considers that it remains of utmost importance to restore a political horizon towards a two-state solution, to witness real and tangible progress on the ground, develop confidence-building measures, improve living conditions for the people, and open the path towards relaunching of the peace process. We reaffirm our readiness to work with both parties and our partners in the region and the international community towards the resumption of meaningful negotiations to resolve all final status issues and to achieve a just and lasting peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the European Union, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Oman, speaking on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council.
سعادة الرئيسة، أدلي بهذا البيان نيابة عن
Chair, I'm making this statement on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council and member states. That's the UAE, the Kingdom of Bahrain, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the State of Kuwait, and my country, the Sultanate of Oman. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council would like to express their concern regarding the dangerous developments in the occupied Palestinian territories recently because of the Israeli escalation, which is extremely dangerous. Our states condemn all attacks against civilians and remind parties of their obligations under principles of international humanitarian law. We call for calm and for the release of hostages, detainees and prisoners, while allowing for food, water and medicine to be delivered under the various provisions of international law. The complete embargo imposed by Israel on Gaza runs counter to the most fundamental criteria of international humanitarian law. We would underscore at the same time the urgent need for a political solution to the crisis to avoid violence being repeated because of Israeli frequent and ongoing attacks by Israel against Palestine and holy sites, which could risk dangerous repercussions. The states of the GCC believe that it is the occupying Israeli forces who are responsible for this situation and for these attacks, and would recall that there was a repeated warning of a possible spillover because of the ongoing occupation and deprivation of the Palestinian people of their rights. including their right to live in safety and security on their own territories and their right to build an independent Palestinian state. The member states of the GCC reiterate their unchanged position, i.e., the Palestinian question is a central issue for Arabs and Muslims. Our member states support the two-state solution and the creation of an independent Palestinian state within the June 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, the rights of refugees in line with the Arab Peace Initiative and relevant relevant UN resolutions, as well as the preservation of historic state and religious status quo of holy sites of Al-Quds al-Sharif. The GCC member states invite the international community to intervene to stop the attacks on Palestine in the city of Jerusalem and to stop the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem. Our states also call for an end to attempts to change the legal status and the demographic composition and the arrangements regarding Islam holy sites. We reaffirm that attempts to impose Israeli sovereignty on Al-Quds are a flagrant violation of international law and international resolutions on this issue. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, the member states of the GCC reiterate their condemnation and denunciation of attempts to annex settlements in the West Bank by Israel. This is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter and the principles of international law and relevant international resolutions, including Security Council Resolution 2334 from 2016 and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice from 2004 and the Fourth Geneva Convention from 1949. The GCC also denounces Israel's ongoing construction of housing units on occupied Palestinian territories. We invite the international community to step up their efforts and exert pressure on the Israeli authorities to prevent these settlements which run counter to laws and international resolutions. We also denounce the repeated incursions of Masjid al-Aqsa by Israeli settlers, supported and protected by the Israeli occupying forces. These incursions are a brazen violation of international law and the status quo of Jerusalem and its holy sites, and they are a violation of the sanctity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and a provocation for Muslims around the world. The member states of the GCC reject all Israeli practices that seek to change the historic legal status of the Al-Aqsa Mosque or encourage its sharing. We underscore that these repeated violations and incursions onto holy sites increase tensions, undermine possibilities of peace, and cause an ongoing maelstrom of violence. Lastly, Chair, the member states of the GCC reiterate their strong support to our Palestinian brothers, supporting the state of Palestine both politically and legally, supporting them in their independence and self-determination. We reaffirm that the Israeli occupying authorities must give a positive response to calls for peace and participate in serious negotiations in good faith to create peace based on the two-state solution and the relevant Security Council resolutions and peace agreements to ensure stability and security in this region of the world. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Oman, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, Egypt fully aligns itself with the statement that will be delivered by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab group. Madam Chair, it is perhaps crucial, given the dire situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and especially the Gaza Strip, to begin by reminding everyone of the simple fact contained at the very beginning of the Secretary General's report contained in document A/78/554, and I quote, "Both international human rights law and international humanitarian law concurrently apply in the occupied Palestinian territory and the occupied Syrian Golan. This includes the application of the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war, which is binding upon Israel as the occupying power," end quote. There are no caveats, no disclaimers, or exceptions to this obligation, distinguished delegates, absolutely none. Civilians are entitled to protection in times of war, regardless of circumstances. No right of self-defense and no necessity of combating terrorism can be used as a justification for the wholesale slaughter of civilians by Israel we are witnessing today. Indeed, those heinous acts are exactly why the principled members of the international community voted overwhelmingly in favor of General Assembly Resolution A/ES10/L25, which called, inter alia, for an immediate, durable, and sustained truce leading to a cessation of hostilities. This resolution contained additional important provisions on the necessity of upholding international humanitarian law, the provision of essential goods and services to civilians, providing protection to Palestinian civilians, and a rejection of their forced displacement. These calls have, of course, fallen on deaf ears. Israel continues its unabated aggression against the Palestinians. Undoubtedly, the position of some member states, which unfortunately continue to justify this continued aggression under a number of pretexts, has contributed to this. Egypt wholeheartedly rejects these pretexts and continues to call for a full cessation of hostilities. Madam Chair, as the aforementioned Secretary General's report amply illustrates, Israel, even before the 7th of October, was engaged in a disturbingly consistent pattern of violations and practices that were clearly contrary to its obligations under international law and the relevant resolution of both the General Assembly and the Security Council. At the forefront of these practices are building settlements. The current Israeli government, like most governments before it, has been engaged in the building of illegal settlements at a feverish pace as part of a 2-year plan to move 500,000 new settlers to the West Bank and to construct 16,500 housing units in Area C in East Jerusalem. This policy goes hand in hand with Israeli demolition of Palestinian property, with the previous year witnessing the highest number of demolitions in the past 7 years. For the uninitiated, the Israeli policy in this regard is to basically make it virtually impossible for the Palestinians to obtain building permits on their own land, keep in mind, and then demolish the structure that Israel failed to issue building permits for. The despicable behavior of the settlers themselves is well documented. I quote paragraph 48 of the Secretary General's report. I quote, citing self-defense, settlers commonly carry firearms and are encouraged by the highest level of political leadership to use them against terrorists without facing significant restrictions or accountability. On the 6th of April, the quote continues, an Israeli settler shot from 1 meter distance at a 14-year-old Palestinian boy for no reason, end quote. These crimes are, of course, they pale in insignificance compared to what is happening now. I'm just quoting from the Secretary General's report. Anyway, what was the reaction by the vaunted Israeli security forces? After briefly arresting the settler, he was released on house arrest shortly after. Paragraph 51 of the same Secretary General's report states that the OHCHR has, open quote, documented a growing number of cases where Israeli security forces actively supported or joined settler attacks, unquote. Violations and the building of illegal settlements in the occupied Syrian Golan have also continued. Again, I quote the Secretary General's report, paragraph 74 in this case, which states that at the Israeli government's projected rate of growth, the Israeli settler population exceeds 29,000, outnumbering the local Syrian population for the first time. Madam Chair, not only are these activities and practices detrimental to the rights of Palestinians and Syrians, but they are also fatal to the peace process. A viable peace process leading to the two-state solution is the only hope that the tragic war in Gaza will not recur. Therefore, these Israeli practices not only come at an exceedingly exorbitant cost to Palestinians, but are also injurious to Israel. Their effects also reverberate far beyond the occupied territories in Israel and affect international peace and security. Madam Chair, in conclusion, and to restate, we continue appealing to the international community to demonstrate more unity, to end these practices, to end these illegal occupation, and to work sincerely and in good faith towards launching a peace process leading to the establishment of a fully independent and viable Palestinian state on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen.
شكرا السيد.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the outset, we would like to express our gratitude to the Chair of the Special Committee and the Vice Chairs for their efforts, and we thank them for the detailed and comprehensive reports. We have taken note of this, including the important recommendations therein. We would also like to thank the ASG for Human Rights and the head of OHCHR office in New York for their briefings. We align ourselves with the statement that will be delivered by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab group. Madam Chair, we reiterate the centrality of the Palestinian cause for the Arab and Islamic nation as a whole, and we reiterate our support for the rights of the Palestinian people, which are inalienable rights, and the right to establish their independent state in line with international legitimacy resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative, which stipulates that comprehensive peace with Israel and normalization of relations must be preceded by an end to its occupation of the Arab and Palestinian territories, and to guarantee the rights of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including the right to self-determination, the right of return, and reparations for Palestinian refugees. This is in addition to having a just solution for their cause in line with General Assembly Resolution of 194 of 1948, and the establishment of an sovereign independent Palestinian state that is viable with East Jerusalem as its capital along the borders of the 4th of June of 1967. We reiterate that there is no way to achieve the stability of the region and the Middle East without a just and comprehensive solution of the Palestinian cause. We emphasize the need to continue the efforts to protect the occupied city of Jerusalem and its holy sites, and to defend it against the rejected and condemned attempts by the occupation to change its demographic and its Arab, Islamic, and Christian identity, in addition to changing the historic and legal status of it. We condemn the colonial policy of Israel, and we call on the Security Council to implement Resolution 2334 of 2016, which emphasized that Israeli settlement is a blatant violation of international law and an obstacle towards achieving peace. We call on the Israeli on the Israelis, the occupying power, to immediately stop all settlement activities in all Palestinian occupied territories, particularly settlement activities in the city of Jerusalem. We condemn in strongest terms the Israeli brutal and continued aggression against the Gaza Strip, which has resulted in the destruction of the infrastructure and the targeting of unarmed civilians, particularly women and children, indiscriminately, including the targeting of a number of medical teams, hospitals, and healthcare providers and schools. These schools were shelters in the Gaza Strip, and this has led to the martyrdom and wounding of thousands of civilians. This is in addition to the imposition of an unjust blockade on the Gaza Strip and cutting off water, electricity, food, and medicine from the unarmed civilian presence. This is a war crime and a crime against humanity and a blatant violation of international law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law, in addition to all moral international laws and norms. We call on the immediate halt of the hostilities and the delivery of humanitarian assistance and protection of civilians. We support State of Palestine's endeavors to obtain full membership at the United Nations, and we call on those states which have not yet recognized the State of Palestine to do so, with the need to support the legal Palestinian efforts aimed at holding the Israeli occupation accountable for war crimes, crimes against humanity that have been committed and which are still being committed against Palestinian people. Madam Chair, we reiterate that the continuation of the occupation of the occupied Syrian Golan since 1967 is a threat to peace and security in the region. We stress that international legitimacy decisions and resolutions all state that the Geneva Convention of 1949 regarding the protection of civilians at times of war does indeed apply to the Syrian occupied Golan. And the occupying power imposing their laws, jurisdiction, and administration over the Golan is null and void and has no legal effect or international legitimacy. We express our firm support for the Syrian right to retrieve all of the occupied Syrian Golan. And thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of Yemen for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Saudi Arabia, speaking on behalf of the Arab group.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group, and we want to re-emphasize our full support to make your mission in chairing this committee a success. Madam Chair, at the outset, we want to emphasize the joint Arab position, which was expressed on more than one occasion, and which calls on ending this war and rejects describing it as self-defense. It is an illegal use of force, and it is an Israeli war that violates disarmament and targets civilians, both women, children, and the elderly. It also destroys their homes, schools, hospitals, mosques, and churches. We call on the immediate implementation of a General Assembly resolution which called an humanitarian truce and to protect the civilians and to respect international humanitarian law by delivering humanitarian assistance to Gaza immediately without restrictions, in addition to rejecting the forced displacement of Palestinians. We condemn in the strongest terms the Israeli crimes of a large scale against the Palestinian people in including the use of internationally banned weapons against the Gaza Strip and the deliberate targeting of women, children, and the elderly in the airstrikes and land incursions, including the targeting of places of worship, infrastructure, schools, and hospitals, and the hindering of the assistance, the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And we call on the perpetrators of these crimes to be held accountable. In light of the tragic situation in the Gaza Strip, we call on allowing the delivery of food, water, fuel, and electricity immediately to the Gaza Strip. The delivery of these essential assistance is a moral and legal responsibility for the international community as a whole, because failing to do so is a violation of international humanitarian law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention. We stress and emphasize that calling on the protection of civilians and the condemnation of their killing and starvation must be an international position that does not discriminate based on identity and nationality, supporting the efforts of the State of Palestine to hold accountable the perpetrators and to achieve justice for the victims, and also the provision of protection for Palestinian civilians in occupied Palestinian territories in line with relevant international resolutions. We warn against any attempt to displace Palestinians and expelling them to Egypt or moving this crisis to neighboring countries. We also reiterate our rejection and condemnation in the strongest terms of any attempts to eliminate the Palestinian cause through forced displacement of the Palestinian people, either inside their territories or to neighboring countries, using false pretexts by the occupying power and some of the countries that try to justify this aggression. We reiterate the need to have a ceasefire and to stop all military Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip in order to stop the violence and its catastrophic effects on the region and on regional peace and security and international peace and security. Madam Chair, we call on stopping the incursions of the members of Knesset and the settlers into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Haram al-Sharif under the protection of the Israeli police, and imposing restrictions on worshippers and allowing extremists to attack and defile holy sites in and around Al-Aqsa. In addition to the escalating attacks against Christians in occupied Jerusalem, the continuation of these practices further strengthens the occupation and undermines the hope of achieving a lasting and comprehensive peace. We also reject and condemn all Israeli violations of Islamic and Christian holy sites, particularly those that aim at changing the legal and historic status quo of the Haram al-Sharif and Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the attempts to temporarily and spatially divide it, and undermining the right of worship for Palestinians. We also express our condemnation and rejection of the escalation in the aggression against Jerusalem, and the intensification of the forced displacement in Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah neighborhoods, and changing the demographic composition and stopping the urban extension of its peoples and isolating it from its Palestinian environment. Madam Chair, peace is necessary for the stability and development of the region. However, it will not be achieved without ending the occupation and meeting the rights of the Palestinian people to freedom and a sovereign state on their lands pursuant to the two-state solution and in line with the international law, including the Arab Peace Initiative. The reference for the Arab Peace Initiative, which is the most comprehensive proposal to achieve a stable and secure future that allows for achieving development and prosperity for all the peoples of the region. This is the Arab strategic solution to end the Israeli occupation of Arab territories and to establish the sovereign independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital along the borders of the 4th of June of 1967, in line with the two-state solution to live in peace and security alongside Israel. We emphasize the centrality of the Palestinian cause for the Arab nation and the Arab identity of East Jerusalem, which is the capital of the Palestinian state, and the right of Palestine to have full sovereignty on all its occupied territories and its natural resources and maritime domain and airspace. In addition to their right to self-determination in the occupied Palestinian territories and in wherever they may be present as an inherent right that has no alternative, just like other peoples around the world, in addition to their right to freedom, dignity, and independence. We reiterate our attachment to peace as a strategic option and a solution for the Arab-Israeli conflict in line with international law and relevant international legitimacy resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. We emphasize our rejection and condemnation of the Israeli colonial settlement policies and measures in the occupied Palestinian territory, including the annexation of lands, the building and expansion of settlements, and the annexation and wall and the forced displacement of Palestinian residents, the demolition of their properties, and the terrorism carried out by settlers through the protection and support of Israeli occupation forces. We condemn the continued escalation in the occupied West Bank and the escalation in the terrorism of Israeli settlements against Palestinians. We call on the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities in relation to implementing Resolution 2334 of 2016, in which it called on Israel, the occupying power, to cease all its settlement activities that undermine the two-state solutions along the borders of 1967. The continuation of the occupation of the occupied Syrian Golan since 1967 is a threat for peace and security in the region and around the world. We remain attached to international legitimacy resolutions which affirm that the Geneva Convention of 1949 in relation to the protection of civilians in times of war is applied and applicable to the occupied Syrian Golan. Israel's imposition as an occupying power of their laws, jurisdiction, and administration to the Golan is null and void and has no legality whatsoever. Madam Chair, the Arab Group calls on the international community to follow up on the situation of Palestinian prisoners and detainees within Israeli prisons and to condemn the arbitrary detention of children, women, elderly, and the representatives of the people. This is in addition to the medical negligence, torture, and the holding of martyrs' bodies. We call on calling Israel to immediately release all prisoners and to force it to abandon the policy of collective punishment and individual punishment that is against the Geneva Fourth Convention. We also call on the international community and international organizations to shoulder their responsibilities, including voting in favor of draft resolutions submitted under this item. In conclusion, we call on adopting and supporting the right of the State of Palestine to achieve full membership in the United Nations, and we call on the states that have not yet recognized the State of Palestine to recognize it. We also support the efforts of Palestinian state on the political and legal levels to embody their independence on their occupied territories. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Ambassador Al-Wasil for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Madam Chair, we thank the Chair of the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories, and the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights for their briefing. We commend the work of the committee despite continuous non-response and non-cooperation from Israel. We thank the Secretary General for his report with concrete recommendations. Madam Chair, At the outset, we would like to reiterate that we urged today morning before this committee under item 49, immediate ceasefire is the call of the day to stop further killing of innocent civilians, and we need to ensure immediate, continuous, sufficient and unhindered provision of essential supplies and services to civilians throughout the Gaza Strip without further delay. In every minute, Israeli occupying forces has been killing Palestinians and UN staff, attacking even the hospitals, schools, refugee camps. 6 hours ago, we were here with the report of killing of 72 UNRWA staff members, and the number is now 79. At this unprecedented situation, the United Nations, especially the Security Council, needs to take urgent action to stop the killing. Madam Chair, both of the report of the Secretary General and the report of the Special Committee have narrated how the rights of the Palestinians and other Arabs have been affected by the illegal Israeli practices and settlement activities, and the latest update of Israel's illegal acts of settlements, demolition and forced evictions. We have witnessed the highest number of demolitions in East Jerusalem this year, particularly in a single month of February 2023 since 2019. We are extremely concerned on Israel's plans to consolidate the ring of settlements that will encircle East Jerusalem with and separate it from other parts of West Bank. We also strongly protest the regularization of outposts and illegal structures and the process of settlement of land title. Settler violence has become double, resulting in Palestinian deaths, injuries and property damages in the last reporting period of the Secretary General. It is concerning that the illegal settlers have been enjoying impunity from the highest political level, and even illegal settler leader has been appointed as minister. Indeed, Israel has been showing clear policies of Israel has been showing clear policies for ensuring complete control over the occupied Palestinian territory, and is acting to alter the demography through the maintenance of a repressive environment for Palestinians and a favorable environment for Israeli settlers. Continuation of this culture of impunity and encouragement of illegal practices and policies, and UN's failure to take any action, have been deteriorating the situation and making the situation beyond control and remedy. These illegal acts also will further make the twisted solution elusive. Therefore, we refer to the observations and recommendations made by Secretary General and urge for consensus actions from this August Assembly to make Israel comply with those recommendations. We also refer to the resolution adopted in 10th Emergency Special Session on 27 October 2023, which firmly rejected any attempts to forced transfer of the Palestinian civilian population. Madam Chair, we thank the Special Committee for very specific and direct recommendation which will help to uphold the rights of the Palestinians. On the basis of those recommendations, the General Assembly and the member states need to take concrete measures to hold Israel accountable for its war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. We also refer to the recommendations of the committee to urge Security Council to consider sanctions against Israel if it persists in paying no attention to its international legal obligations. Madam Chair, since 7 October 2023, Israel has killed more than 10,000 Palestinians, and half of them are children. To that end, we refer to the recommendation of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Palestinian territories occupied since 1967 to include Israel and occupied Palestinian territory in the list of parties that commit grave violation against children of the annexes to the Secretary General's report on children and conflict in accordance with Security Council Resolution 1379 and subsequent resolutions. Madam Chair, for decades we have been talking about the rights of Palestinians under the illegal occupation of Israel. We have been urging to ensure the rights of Palestinians, ensure accountability. We have been talking about violation of international human rights and humanitarian law by Israel and ignorance of numerous resolutions adopted in the General Assembly and the Security Council. However, we have failed to take any concrete action to solve this crisis, particular action for the well-recognized two-state solution with pre-1967 border. In consequence, today we have been seeing one of the direst humanitarian crises in the world, where we have been witnessing blockade of humanitarian assistance, targeted killing of civilians and UN personnel, and use of white phosphorus in artillery shells. Even we have heard threatening to take any steps, including the use of nuclear weapons. Madam Chair, we would repeat what we said in the emergency special session. It is not acceptable collectively punishing a civilian population who has been struggling for their independence for more than 7 decades, and any attack cannot be justified in the name of right to self-defense. In an occupying power, Israel's claim of right to self-defense and its endorsement by many is nothing but a fallacy of international law on the question of occupation and the rights and duties of occupying power. It is our collective duty to end this oppression and heinous attack. Finally, Madam Chair, we need to say again, ensuring the rights of the people of Palestine is possible only by establishing independent, viable and sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital under a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders. We urge all to take necessary measures towards this end. We also call for the withdrawal of Israel from the occupied Syrian Golan. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bangladesh for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, a horrendous carnage continues in Gaza for almost a month now. There can be no justification for the indiscriminate attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. The attacks of collective punishment, attempts at forced displacement of people are unacceptable and have to stop. There is an urgent need for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Uninterrupted humanitarian access to and within Gaza is also an imperative. The situation elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territory remains a cause for deep concern. Settler violence is spreading, raising the risk of widespread hostilities. According to OCHA, 136 Palestinians, including 43 children, have been killed by settlers and Israeli security forces in the West Bank since October 7. What we are witnessing today is yet another episode of violence emanating from the continued occupation by Israel of Palestinian territory and the dispossession, oppression, and dehumanization of the Palestinian people. Israel's expansion of illegal settlements, forced evictions, demolitions, mass displacement, and extrajudicial killings in the occupied Palestinian territory, all carried out with full impunity, are the underlying causes of this cycle of violence. These practices undermine the perspective for a just and lasting solution. They contravene international law and the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions. Madam Chair, another cause of concern are the attempts at violating the sanctity of Masjid al-Aqsa and the Muslim and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem. The repeated raids on the Al-Aqsa compound and the violence against worshippers only serve to fuel violence and entrench hatred and mistrust. We therefore strongly reiterate that the sanctity and historic status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem must be respected. Madam Chair, Israel will not be able to ensure its security at the cost of the fundamental human rights and freedoms of the Palestinian people. It will not achieve its declared objectives by breaching international humanitarian law and oppressing Palestinian aspirations for freedom, dignity, and statehood. The international community has a responsibility to ensure that these blatant violations of international law and international humanitarian law are brought to an end. The adoption of the humanitarian resolution presented to the General Assembly's Emergency Special Session has shown that the international community will not remain silent. It is a clear signal that the majority of the UN members demand an immediate end to indiscriminate attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. The Security Council must therefore undertake its responsibility and end its paralysis in the face of these blatant violations of international law. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. You have the floor, sir.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela supports the statement to be made by the distinguished delegation of the Republic of Azerbaijan on behalf of the Movement of Non-Aligned Countries. Moreover, we welcome the work of the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories. And we would also like to welcome the introduction of the report contained in document A/78/553, which relates, among other things, the obstacles posed by the occupying power preventing the full implementation of its mandate, and we support, of course, every one of their recommendations and conclusions. We'd also like to thank the Secretary General for introducing the report contained in document A/78/554. Madam Chairman, today, 30 days have gone by since the beginning of the latest spiral of violence, death, and destruction in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The loss of human lives is not only something to be condemned, it's also reprehensible, regardless of whoever commits it and under what circumstances any act of aggression has been committed, which flagrantly violates such a fundamental human right as the right to life. Even when, in this case, the background is quite well known and has been going on for more than 65 years. Now, what is happening today in the occupied Palestinian territory, and mainly in the Gaza Strip, goes beyond a crisis or humanitarian disaster, as the Secretary General has said today, just 2 hours ago. Today, those 2 million Palestinians who live, or I should say, survive in the Gaza Strip, many of them living as refugees, are living a true nightmare. This is a true crisis created by man. One of those crises which in any other context would be condemned unreservedly by the U.S. government, which today has preferred to be an accomplice to a genocide. The Gaza Strip, which has been blocked for many years, and which only this year has been a victim of the barbarity and brutality of at least 3 Israeli military operations, is today under siege and subject to a total communication blackout. Not only have they cut off communication, but they've also denied the entry of humanitarian assistance and essential goods in order, and thus violating the very right to life of those who live there. This is not only a flagrant violation of any standard of international humanitarian law, but we're talking about true war crimes. All of this is happening while there are still indiscriminate attacks against innocent civilians and against civilian infrastructure. And while the indiscriminate bombing continues against schools, refugee camps, hospitals, food warehouses, and critical infrastructure. More than 18,000 tons of explosives have been launched on Gaza in the last 30 days. To put it in perspective, the intensity of this bombing is 1.5 times greater than the intensity of the nuclear bomb used in Hiroshima. How can we claim to justify this? How can we catalog this as something different than a true genocide? Madam Chairman, Articles 5 and 7 of the Rome Statute of the International Court of Justice point out that genocide is any act perpetrated with the intention of totally or partially destroying a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, while a crime against humanity is, among other acts, extermination, which involves the intentional deprivation of access to food or medicine with a view to causing the destruction of a population. These definitions fit in perfectly with this situation. A situation where we cannot remain inactive and which regrettably doesn't show any signs of de-escalating despite the risk that it involves, including the potential spreading of the conflict to other parts of the Middle East. This is all we can conclude after listening to bold statements by some senior representatives of the Israeli regime who have even proposed launching an atomic bomb on Gaza, and this just a few hours ago. And hence we firmly condemn the recommendation contained in the report that the ICC assume its responsibility, or ICJ assume its responsibility and advances effectively with the investigating such serious crimes. It's incredible that in other situations these verdicts are delivered swiftly, while in this case the prosecutor of the court seems to be paralyzed, and this of course only serves the interests of the aggressor. Justice cannot be selective, and no one can be above the law. And it's precisely this lack of accountability and the cycle of impunity throughout these years which has led us to this point. If at this stage we still haven't understood this, it would be very difficult to reach the long-sought resolution of the Palestinian question. And we have to put an end to the impunity which has made it possible for the occupying power, to continue with their brutal aggression, with the cruel and inhuman practices of domination, exploitation, and appropriation, and with the criminal colonial settlement policies, as well as apartheid, which the heroic Palestinian people have been resisting for more than 55 years. Madam Chairman, the question of the settlements as well as the destruction of homes is another one of the precursors to the crisis we are seeing today. Besides being illegal, the Security Council has pointed out that this represents an obstacle to implementing the two-state solution. Still, this illegal practice continues, which has emboldened settlers to continue their acts of aggression against the Palestinians. According to the most recent report of the committee before us, at least 3 episodes of settler violence are seen every day, a number which in recent years has gone up, and we have to put an end to this policy of settlements both in the occupied Palestinian territory as well as in eastern Jerusalem, in the occupied Syrian Golan, and to put an end to any practice which aims to alter the legal, physical, and demographic status of these territories. For our country, the two-state solution, living side by side in peace and security, is the only path, is the only way, the most just, lasting, and broadly supported way, supported by the international community, to put an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which we are sure would lead to peace and stability in the Middle East as a whole, and thus make it possible to move towards the withdrawal of Israel from the Syrian Golan and from all of the occupied Syrian territories. To move in this direction, however, the Security Council needs to shoulder its responsibilities, and that all of the international community must insist on the need to guarantee this clear political solution. However, it's very difficult to move forward with a view to resuming the necessary political dialogue and credible negotiations, which are both serious and direct negotiations between the parties, if we are not capable of even achieving a ceasefire, nor of guaranteeing access for humanitarian assistance, which is needed to save lives, even when before our very eyes we see this day after day, minute after minute. We see how the situation on the ground is worsening, with thousands of innocent civilian lives lost, mainly Palestinian women and girls whose dreams and illusions of living in a free country, an independent and sovereign country, have been snatched away. Once again, Madam Chairman, to put this in perspective, this is not a question of mere statistics, but rather of human lives. And when this meeting will be over, this 3-hour meeting will be over, the Israeli regime will have killed 15 Palestinian children. 5 Palestinian children die every day that we are in this room without guaranteeing an end to the hostilities. To conclude, Venezuela reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people, as well as its unwavering position in support of the defense of the independence and their inalienable right to self-determination, and the realization of the legitimate national aspirations in their state of Palestine, with the pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital. Lastly, we insist that the international community no longer procrastinate and sidestep the situation of refugees in Palestine, nor their right of return, nor their desire for peace, justice, freedom, and security for the entire Palestinian people. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab group, and we would like to deliver the following remarks in our national capacity. We reiterate that the international community, particularly influential parties, should undertake their political and ethical responsibilities, stand for peace, for justice, and values of the UN, human rights, peace, and security. This is especially important after the Security Council has failed on 4 occasions to take a decision that would stop the aggression, the genocide by Israeli occupation forces that continue unabated against the Palestinian people for the last month. As much as we condemn with the strongest terms possible the war crimes committed by the occupying power against Palestinian civilians, crimes committed through the systematic killing of children, women, families, the targeting of hospitals, schools, humanitarian workers, worship sites, using starvation and cutting of basic services as a weapon of war, the same way we condemn them, we also cannot accept by any means possible the continued international silence and the failure of the international organizations to undertake their responsibilities. We refuse double standards and selective application of laws and international and the principles of the Charter, international humanitarian law, and international law, or instrumentalize them to justify crimes. We hold the occupation responsible for the failure of all peace initiatives because they deliberately obstructed peace by backing away from their obligations and failure to abide by their commitments that made us lose many opportunities to establish peace. Occupation forces use provocative practices to ignite tension in the occupied Palestinian territory, to have a reaction from the Palestinian people that then they later use to justify their retaliation, illegitimate retaliation against defenseless civilians. We today are at a very critical juncture where we witness genocide, forcible transfer against Gaza residents that continue under as the world watch without any accountability and at the highest levels of disregard to all international resolutions. If the international community and the UN do not intervene today in a responsible and effective manner to stop these heinous crimes against humanity and to prevent the displacement of Palestinians, then this will be the international system subjected to political calculations and systematic violations of international law, international humanitarian law, and all the values and principles of the UN. We reiterate our support for our Palestinian people and call for an end to the war crimes of the occupation and their hostile practices. We renew the demand to end occupation and all attempts to equate between the occupiers and those who are being attacked, or to have any misinterpretations of the right to self-defense, because what is right is clear and what is wrong is clear. No statutes of limitations will apply to the rights of the Palestinian people, nor would the Israeli aggressive practices eliminate them. We renew our demands for an immediate ceasefire to stop the bloodshed, provide international protection for the Palestinian people, prevent forcible transfer, and guarantee the entry of and access of humanitarian aid in a sustainable manner into Gaza Strip. The occupation and the ongoing occupation of the Golan Heights since 1967 is a threat to peace and security in the region and the world. We reaffirm the international resolutions that say that the Geneva Convention of 1945 related to the protection of civilians during times of war apply to the occupied Syrian Golan, and considering the occupying power and the imposition by Israel of its jurisdiction and administration on Golan as null and void and has no international legal effect. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba. You have the floor, madam.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Our delegation welcomes the work done by the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories. The report contained a document A/78/553 reflects the work that has been done by the committee, as well as the drawbacks they have encountered along the way and imposed by the occupying power, as well as their targets and goals for the future. We would also like to express our gratitude to the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967. For a detailed report which contains many concerns with relation to the human rights situations in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and in Gaza. Madam Chairman, Cuba expresses once again its deep concern over the tense situation which we are currently seeing in the Middle East. We have witnessed recent events affecting a civilian population with catastrophic consequences. The Palestinian territory is still occupied, and in the current circumstances, we have seen an increase in the destruction of Palestinian civilian infrastructure and property carried out by indiscriminate bombing as part of a collective punishment carried out by Israeli authorities, which has led to the forced displacement of a population on an unprecedented scale as part of their illegal settlement policies and practices. Israel has violated the relevant UN resolutions and flagrantly violates its obligations as an occupying power. In the midst of this massive humanitarian disaster in the occupied Palestinian territory, in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, Cuba reiterates its unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian and Arab cause. This people has been a target for more than 75 years of an illegal foreign occupation and has been the target of illegal policies and practices, including collective punishment, war crimes, and crimes against humanity carried out by the Israeli government in grave violation of international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The domination of the Palestinian people carried out by Israel, the exploitation and appropriation of its resources, as well as the egregious denial of the rights of this population, is a true system of apartheid against these people. Madam Chairman, after 75 years of occupation, Israel continues to not comply with the Security Council resolution, which asks for its withdrawal from the Syrian Golan, while completely overlooking Security Council Resolution 497 of 1981. Once again, Cuba reaffirms that any measure or action that the Israeli government is carrying out in the current situation, or has carried out with a view to modifying the legal, physical, or demographic status, as well as the institutional structure of the occupied Syrian Golan, including all of the measures to exercise their jurisdiction and administration over this territory. All of these are violations and lack legal validity. Likewise, we reaffirm that all these measures and actions, including the illegal expansion and building of Israeli settlements in the Syrian Golan since 1967, these constitute violations of international law, international agreements, the Charter as well as the resolutions of the United Nations, including Resolution 497 from 1981 of the Security Council and the Fourth Geneva Convention, in clear defiance of the international community. Cuba will continue to call for the total and unconditional withdrawal of Israel from the Syrian Golan and from all of the occupied Arab territories, and calls for a constructive dialogue which would respect all of the peoples of the region. Similarly, it's regrettable that the Security Council, an organ in charge of addressing compliance with the most sacred statutes of the Charter, such as maintaining international peace and security for all, has not been able to reach an agreement which would put an end to the colonizing practices and aggressions carried out by Israel against the Palestinian peoples and Syrian peoples of the occupied Golan. And we condemn the fact that the United States has been an accomplice and is responsible for the impunity for Israel, preventing the Security Council from taking concrete measures to put an end to this historic injustice. It's shameful that the United States has vetoed 46 resolutions related to the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, the most recent among them just a few days ago. On this occasion, the crime is even greater because it made it impossible to put an end to a siege which these people have suffered over the last few weeks, which constitute various war crimes. We have to put an immediate end to the blockade and all of its manifestations as a policy of pressure exercised by powers in countries at a disadvantage with a view to implanting their control, and which Israel is practicing today in the Gaza Strip. Madam Chairman, Cuba has supported since the very beginning the request for the General Assembly to seek the guidance of the ICJ on the legal consequences derived from the Israeli practices and policies in this critical situation for the Palestinian people, which has worsened alarmingly in the last few weeks, and this will contribute to achieving a justice and a lasting peace in the region. We reaffirm once again our total support for the entry of Palestine as a full-fledged member of this organization, and we call upon the Security Council to take a position swiftly and in keeping with the rules as it would do for any other member of the organization. Our country calls for a broad, just, and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the basis of a two-state solution. And we demand that we put an end to the violation of the inalienable rights of Palestinians on their own territory, and that once again we allow Palestinians to have the right to self-determination, to have an independent and sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital and with the pre-1967 borders, and with guarantees for the safe return of refugees. Cuba reiterates that at this time, a very difficult moment for the Palestinian people, and where Israel's killing machine, the occupying power, is unleashing its fury against the civilian population of Gaza and the West Bank. Every minute of silence and activity, every moment of neglect, a double standard, will lead to the loss of even more innocent lives. We reiterate our call to put an end to double standards, to selectivity, and to political manipulation, which violate the cause of international peace and security. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative for her statement, and I now give the floor to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My delegation associates itself with a statement to be delivered by the distinguished delegation of the Republic of Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement. To begin with, my delegation strongly denounces Israel for committing heinous massacre of civilians in the occupied Palestinian territory in flagrant violation of the international law, and calls for an immediate halt to such atrocities. At the same time, we express deep condolences to thousands of innocent people who lost their precious lives in this bloody conflict, and to the bereaved families. Madam Chair, the current Middle East crisis has once again alerted the international community that the issue of Palestine is the most pressing task, whose solution brooks no further delay. The international community has exerted persevering efforts for several decades to put an end to the deep-rooted contradiction and confrontation between Palestine and Israel, and to ensure lasting peace in the Middle East. However, instead of addressing the problem, the situation has plunged into a vortex of more severe dispute and showdown, which has resulted in the horrifying conflict of bloodshed as of today. As recently stated by Mr. Secretary General Guterres, This is an outcome entailed by the fact that Israel has illegally occupied the Palestinian territory and inflicted suffocating pains upon millions of the Arab peoples for 56 years. Madam Chair, today the Middle East peace process has been totally undermined, and even a grave armed conflict broke out. The root cause lies in the extreme one-sided policy of the US, which has tacitly approved of and encouraged Israel in its unlawful attempt at territorial expansion. As witnessed by the world, the US immediately after the outbreak of the Middle East crisis committed itself to providing military aid to Israel and dispatched 2 aircraft strike groups to the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. Moreover, the President, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense of the US flew to Israel one after another to give green light to the operations of massacre targeting the Palestinian civilians. In particular, at the UN Security Council, the US vetoed on a resolution featuring immediate ceasefire and alleviation of the humanitarian crisis, thereby blocking even a small possibility and hope for preventing aggravated situation in the Middle East. Such arbitrary and impudent behavior of the US is giving rise to surging indignation and condemnation from the international community. All the facts clearly prove that it is none other than the US that desperately obstructs peaceful resolution of the issues of Palestine and the Middle East, inspired eagerly by the just international community, including the Arab peoples. Madam Chair, as long as the US continues to resort to the biased and double-dealing behavior of patronizing and backing Israeli acts of territorial extortion and massacre of civilians, peace and stability can never settle down in the Middle East. The international community should resolutely denounce and reject Israel, the root cause of all troubles in the Middle East, as well as the schemes of aggravating the regional situation by the US, its patron. It should also enhance solidarity and cohesion and take decisive measures to that end. Israel should fully comply with the Resolution A/ES10/L.25 adopted at the emergency special session of the General Assembly on October 27, stop all acts of infringing upon the rights to existence and development of the Palestinian people, and withdraw without delay from the occupied Arab territories, including the occupied Syrian Golan. The delegation of the DPRK remains committed to support for solidarity with the Palestinian people in their just struggle to terminate Israeli illegal occupation of territory and regain their national rights by establishing an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Our support and solidarity also go to the Arab peoples in their just cause for a fair solution of the Middle East issue. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan. You have the floor, sir.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, we align ourselves with a statement made by Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab group. Once again, the Middle East and the Palestinian question is drawing the attention of the international community because of the unprecedented barbarity and destruction. The deterioration in the occupied Arab territories is the natural result of a failure of the international community to resolve and regulate this issue in line with international law and the relevant resolutions to build peace and security in the Middle East. This is would be the only strategic choice for peace in the region. This ongoing conflict without a political horizon could have dangerous repercussions for the conflict. Our government announces the taking of targeting civilians, including at Jabalia in the refugee camp and Al Aliyah Hospital too. These are barbaric acts. The Palestinian people have the right to create their own sovereign state within 1967 borders. with East Jerusalem as its capital. Not meeting this need is unacceptable. The international community must work to resolve the Palestinian question on the basis of a two-state solution, the creation of a Palestinian state. A failure to protect civilians is a failure for the international community and the United Nations, and it is a failure of all moral values. Priority must be given to the protection of civilians and the protection of critical infrastructure for the survival and also humanitarian assistance, energy, food, water and medication. The practices of the Israeli authorities in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, including the attacks or strikes on civilians and attacks on civilians, are violations of international humanitarian law and affront to humanity. Sudan underscores its support for all measures to prevent the spread of the conflict. This will only have grave humanitarian repercussions in a region that's already characterized by crisis. We support all regional international efforts to prevent an escalation and to reach a ceasefire. We call for the 15-year blockade on Gaza to be lifted and for crossing points to be opened so that humanitarian assistance can be delivered to avoid the imminent humanitarian catastrophe. We call for the release of all hostages, prisoners and detainees and stop the forced expulsion. As regards the visit to Rafah by the Secretary General and his appeal for the delivery of humanitarian assistance, we support that. Chair, the vote on a resolution last Friday, a week ago, and Friday was adopted, and this was a vote for humanity and justice at a time when the number of victims is now over 10,000. The number of people who has been injured is more than 23,000. The General Assembly resolution is the minimum that's necessary to save civilians from death and destruction, particularly young women, children and older persons. We call for a two-state solution to be respected and a real solution rather than this war machine that only sows horror and desolation. Chair, Sudan underscores the fact that the Palestinian question is the priority issue for the Arab and Muslim world. We call for the creation of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state within 1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital, in line with international law and relevant resolutions from the United Nations and agreements. We underscore the Christian and Islamic nature of the holy sites, and we call for a return of solidarity and support to the Geneva Conventions. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sudan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Senegal. You have the floor, sir.
Madame la Présidente.
Chair, as a member of the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs in the occupied territories, my delegation would like to thank Ambassador Mohan Pieris from Sri Lanka for, in his capacity as chair of that committee, having presented the report before member states. In addition to fully aligning ourselves with this statement, my delegation would like to say a few words in our national capacity. Chair, first of all, my delegation would like to take this opportunity to congratulate and encourage the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and all UN entities involved for their laudable efforts including those that they have undertaken since the events of the 7th of October 2023, as illustrated in the reports that we also have before us. The current events bear the hallmark of a tragedy that has lasted far too long and that affects innocent people above all. And 30 years after the Oslo Agreement, it is unfortunate the images that we had of a hopeful month of September have been once again replaced, chased out by those from a month of October, which has been full of tragedy, tears and despair. Senegal condemns once again the massacre with civilian victims in the Gaza Strip, and we reiterate our appeal for de-escalation. My country encourages all initiatives that work towards calm, including processes underway to release hostages. My country also reiterates its appeal for an immediate ceasefire to allow immediate, complete, sustainable, safe and unfettered humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip. This is the thinking behind our tireless resolution to Resolution ES10/21, adopted on the 27th of October 2023 at the 10th Emergency Special Session of the United Nations General Assembly on illegal measures taken by Israeli authorities in East Jerusalem and across the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. Unfortunately, Israel's reprisals, which take the form of air bombardment and a land offensive, have already led to more than 10,000 deaths, including 88 UNRWA staff. It's also led to the destruction of civilian infrastructure and housing. These are critical. This threatens the prospect of displaced peoples being able to return home. When faced with the gravity and the urgency of this crisis, which is unfolding before our very eyes, my delegation urges once again Israel, as the occupying power, to demonstrate restraint and to spare civilians, hospitals, places of worship, UN facilities, all humanitarian personnel, as well as medical and media and press personnel. Here, with this most recent report, my delegation would like to reiterate its support to the brave teams of UNRWA and advocate, given the circumstances, for its sustainable and predictable funding. Chair, this is an emergency that must imperatively be addressed. At the same time, the international community must step up its efforts to tackle the root causes of a conflict, particularly focusing more on the ways of ensuring the end of the illegal and unjust practices that diverge from the path towards peace. And this connection, my delegation can only deplore those voices who, within the Israeli government, continue to sow the seeds of instability, encouraging the acceleration of a discriminatory and aggressive policy of settlement, expulsion and demolition of houses. My delegation will never tire of denouncing these practices, which are quite obviously contrary to international law and all
at the request of the United Arab Emirates and China. In the wake of Hamas terrorist attacks, the situation on the ground is deteriorating dangerously in the Gaza Strip and throughout the whole region. France is deeply concerned at the number of civilian casualties in Gaza, which stands at several thousand. It condemns the attacks on United Nations sites on humanitarian personnel. Given the gravity of the humanitarian situation and the scale of the needs of the Gaza population, France calls for an immediate humanitarian truce. This truce must be durable and sustained. It is absolutely necessary and must lead to a ceasefire. Safe humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip must also be guaranteed in order to increase the number of humanitarian convoys. Given the urgency of the situation and at the initiative of President Emmanuel Macron, France is organizing an international humanitarian conference for the people of Gaza on November 9th in Paris. The aim is to coordinate international efforts to ensure that the international humanitarian response meets the needs of the Palestinians. The suffering of Palestinians and Israelis must end. Israel has, of course, the right to defend itself and the duty to do so in compliance with international humanitarian law, while protecting civilian populations. The regional conflagrations reminds us of the urgent need to restore a political horizon with security guarantees for Israel and a state for the Palestinians, living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security. This imperative can no longer be just a long-term goal or a slogan. We must make it a reality. France is calling for the adoption of a Security Council resolution without further delay. We worked closely with the Brazilian presidency to achieve this, and we will also work with the Chinese presidency. Thank you.
Ambassador, good. Okay, thank you. When you speak about an immediate ceasefire or truce, a humanitarian truce, is it just really just words? Because your closest partners in the Western Alliance, the United Kingdom and the United States, came out very openly against it. So how are you going to succeed in achieving this?
I think what we need to do is to protect the civilians and to give them humanitarian relief. And to do so, we need a humanitarian truce, we need humanitarian pauses, whatever you want to call them. We need to give access to the UN agencies, to NGOs, and this is what needs to happen now. The humanitarian effort which is taking place now is insufficient. There are still fightings, it should stop, so we need a truce, a sustainable and durable truce. It should lead to a ceasefire, but we need first a truce to provide humanitarian access.
It when the United States and the United Kingdom are standing against it in the Council.
To get to an agreement among Security Council members, and this is the whole discussion we are having now in the Security Council to come to an agreement.
Can you just tell us a little more about the Paris meeting?
Yeah, it's a humanitarian conference that President Macron is organizing on Thursday. We will have UNRWA, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, Martin Griffiths, who was just with us here, will be there as well. It's about, number one, coordinating the aid to Gaza, providing access, and number two, trying to get more resources for Gaza, which needs desperately more aid now.
And any representatives from the region, from the Palestinians, from Israel?
The Prime Minister of Palestine will be there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, so what's the holdup?
Hold up on what?
On a resolution, on a unified consensus voice.
It's no agreement at this point.
What are the holdups?
I'm sorry? Not that I'm aware of. You'll have to ask the sponsors.
If it were a humanitarian truce, the U.S. would be supportive. It's just that it leads to a ceasefire?
We've talked about humanitarian pauses, and we're interested in pursuing language on that score, but there are disagreements within the Council about whether that's acceptable.
Secretary Blinken said
said last week that, there were some discussions are starting to happen about what might happen in Gaza once the fighting stops, whether a security force might be needed. Have you started any of those conversations here? Is anyone at the Security Council starting to talk about what might be needed?
No, I mean, obviously there is concern about what happens the day after, but we're not at that point.
The Israeli attack killed 4 civilians last Sunday in South Lebanon. Do you consider that as a sign of spread?
Look, we've been concerned about any kind of violence going on along the border with Lebanon, and we've said and we've made very clear that we do not want this war to spread. Okay, so we are working to try to make sure that it doesn't, because we think it's in no one's interest for that war to spread to Lebanon.
With regard to time frame, is it an open-ended sort of time frame for Israel to finish the job, or is there, for example, a limitation of 7 days, 10 days, or is it an open-ended agreement between you and them that you can go for whatever it takes?
As far as I understand, there is no open-ended kind of agreement. There's no agreement. Israel will do what it feels it needs to do in terms. You'll have to ask Israel. That's.
What did the U.S. Secretary of State accomplish in his visit this past week?
Well, I think he's accomplished a lot. We're trying to move the dial on, first and foremost, preventing this war from spreading, dealing with the humanitarian situation on the ground. Those are two critical elements, and the hostages, trying to get the hostages out.
How has the humanitarian situation improved?
Well, again, this is something.
Getting trucks are even getting through now.
Well, we're trying to get more trucks through. I mean, that's the effort that the Secretary was engaged in this weekend, not just the Secretary, but with other players, including the UN. So, look, this is a difficult situation. We're trying to do the best we can with the situation on the ground. So it's going to take some time.
Mr. Ambassador, can you tell us what the next step is for the Security Council? Is there another meeting planned? Are there more consultations planned? Is the E10 draft still on the table?
Well, with regard to the E10 draft, you'll have to ask the E10 about that, but I'm sure the President of the Council will want to have further discussions in informal consultations, maybe at some point open briefings. That'll obviously be the subject of further discussion amongst council members, but that's pretty much where it is at the moment.
And Ambassador, will there be representation of the U.S. at the Paris meeting that they've announced?
I imagine so. I haven't been following that too closely, but I'm sure we'll be represented there. Okay.
Ambassador, what is your message to the civilians of Gaza as they wait for the Security Council to come to a consensus?
Look, the message for the civilians in Gaza is that the international community is with them. This is a very difficult time, obviously. We are trying here at the Security Council to come to an agreement on some kind of a path forward. We're doing everything we can. Many people are working extremely hard. Secretary Blinken has been working very, very hard. He did so over the weekend. So we are working hard. We obviously feel for those who have lost their lives. And we obviously feel very much for the civilians of Gaza, but also for the civilians in Israel who've been the victims of a terrible terrorist attack, who have some of their relatives taken hostage. So this is a complicated situation on the ground, and many people, including in the U.S. government, are working to try to do what we can to resolve this issue. Okay, folks? Thank you.
Ambassador, I'm sorry, on the number of deaths, can you clarify something? Because the French ambassador said there were 7,000 and the UN said 10,000.
Good evening, dear colleagues. The United Arab Emirates and China called for this meeting to express grave concern at the continued attacks by Israel on hospitals, refugee camps, schools, UN premises, places of worship, and other civilian facilities in the Gaza Strip, including most recently on the Jabalia and El Maghazi refugee camps, El Fakhura School, and the Dar El Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. As the Secretary General stated this morning, this is a crisis of humanity. In less than a month, more than 10,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been killed. And as we speak, Palestinian civilians continue to be killed. Children are bearing the brunt. As several UN officials have stated already, Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. No one is safe more. No one is safe. More UN aid workers and journalists have been killed in 4 weeks than in any month of a conflict in decades. If ever, Palestinian civilians are also deprived of necessities essential to their survival. In the midst of this catastrophic situation, we emphasize the need for the Security Council to act with urgency and adopt a meaningful and actionable resolution. Over the past couple of weeks, members of the Security Council have been working tirelessly to this end. We call for an urgent humanitarian ceasefire. The Secretary General just made the same call this morning, a humanitarian ceasefire now. This is desperately needed to enable full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, including for UN and humanitarian personnel, consistent with international humanitarian law. We urge all parties to take steps urgently towards a cessation of hostilities to ensure the protection of civilians. We demand that the parties to the conflict facilitate the continuous, sufficient, and unhindered provision of essential goods and services to all civilians throughout the Gaza Strip. These must include electricity, water, fuel, food, and medical supplies sustained and at scale. Ambassador Nusseibeh will continue.
As we heard today in our briefings, civilians in Gaza cannot even find safety in UN facilities, schools, hospitals, and refugee camps. These civilian facilities have been under attack in violation of international law. It is imperative that their protective status is upheld. We condemn all violations of international humanitarian law, all violence against civilians, including all acts of terrorism and indiscriminate attacks. We condemn the 7th October attacks by Hamas on Israel. We also condemn the indiscriminate attacks by Israel on the Gaza Strip. We express our grave concern at the continued detention of hostages and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as their safety, well-being, and humane treatment consistent with international law. But the killing and maiming of children, attacks on schools and hospitals in the Gaza Strip, and denying children access to humanitarian assistance are all very grave violations against children. We call on all parties to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We reiterate the need for the parties to take measures to ensure the safety and well-being of civilians and their protection, as well as humanitarian and medical personnel, UN personnel, and journalists. Wars have rules, and they must be upheld. Thank you.
Can you give us an update on the draft resolution and where that might be at and whether you're progressing towards a vote?
The discussions are ongoing. The full 15 members of the Council are fully engaged on the draft text, and we will continue trying to narrow the gaps that still exist between Council members on this issue.
Ambassador, can we have a clarification?
Look, I think the gaps remain on what is achievable on the ground, where the political appetite is among some of the major players on this file, and the crisis on the ground as well. I think the most pressing need on the ground, which all council members have recognized, is the urgent humanitarian need. But I think the bigger problem, which also many council members have recognized, is that without a cessation of hostilities or some kind of humanitarian truce that is immediately implemented, far too many civilians have already lost their lives, and far too many more will continue to lose their lives unless that is put into place. But those are some of the parameters of where the gaps in the discussion exist, and I think the conversations are ongoing to try and have impact on the ground.
So it looks like at the Security Council, you don't even agree on the number of casualties. The French ambassador just came here and talked about 7,000 people dead. You say over 10,000. Do you agree on the number?
The number we're using is from UN official briefings, so we'll leave it at that. I don't mean to be morbid, but there are a number of innocent lives under the rubble today, so until everybody is accounted for, we actually don't have a sense of the full scale, but the numbers so far are the ones that the UN are giving us, and I think we can all rely on those numbers.
Ambassador, can humanitarian aid, food, water, any medicine, can it be administrated and given to the people of Gaza in a safe and secure and efficient way while there's still fighting going on? And the humanitarian pause, does it mean that you feed them in one hand and a few hours after the cessation of hostilities for whatever hours, you bomb them again? I mean, does that make sense to anybody?
Thank you for the question. I think you're all expressing some of the frustration that council members express daily in our discussions and deliberations. The number of trucks going in are very clearly not at the scale required. They're not even at the scale that existed prior to the war on Gaza, so clearly insufficient, and in particular with the ongoing hostilities, even less sufficient than they were before. This is a requirement of international humanitarian law, and we are all committed to doing what we can with partners on the ground. Egypt has played a very important role on this, but also with other partners on the ground, with Israel in the Gaza Strip, as well as with partners from around the world who have contributed to the devastating humanitarian situation to try and scale up at the scale that the UN has itself asked for, and that is quite a large scale up that needs to happen. I mean, just today in my national capacity, I'll mention that the UAE president has launched an emergency field hospital that will be set up in Gaza. 5 aircraft have left Abu Dhabi airport this morning and will be arriving in the Al Arish airstrip shortly, and we will try and set up an emergency field hospital in Gaza, crossing through the correct borders. We've also announced that we will be taking 1,000 Palestinian children who require medical treatment along with their families to come and rehabilitate in the UAE. So we are working on all of these fronts to try and help people who have just seen far too much suffering already.
Is that with Israel agreement, or do you mean in Egyptian borders near Rafah?
I will share all of the details in the coming day or two. This is being operated from headquarters.
Will both UAE and China be at the Thursday meeting in Paris? Will there be a representative?
We are sending a minister to that meeting, the Paris meeting.
At this moment, I don't have further information on that. What I can tell is that I fully agree with what Ambassador Nusabi has shared with us in our national capacity. We have made our position known. And meanwhile, as the presidency of the Security Council, what I can tell is that I will continue to take the current situation in Gaza as the top priority of the Security Council. And that's, I'm sure, is also your request. And we will do whatever your concerns are our concerns. And we will do whatever we can to realize the ceasefire, to protect more civilians, to avoid further humanitarian catastrophe, and also to prevent further spillover to the neighboring region. That's very much important for the peace and security for the whole region. So we will do whatever we can along the right direction. That might be challenging, that might be difficult, and that's why this Middle East issue has been there for so long, but we will never give up.
When's the next council meeting or consultation?
There will be a council briefing, I believe, on Thursday, but under the Chinese presidency, we intend to call for regular briefings, meetings, formal and informal, to keep the spotlight on this very, very critical humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding on the Gaza Strip. And thank you for your support. Thank you.
Irish TV. People outside this building, ordinary people, cannot understand why you can't reach agreement. You're diplomats. It's literally your job. Why can't you reach agreement when 420 children a day are dying or being injured?
I think that's a fair question. I think the Council feels enormous pressure to reach agreement on how to help and impact the dire situation on the ground. The General Assembly has met and spoken. 121 countries did reach agreement. So there is clearly an emerging consensus of what needs to happen next. But the Security Council is being looked to operationalize our impact on the ground and to save lives. So today the priority is saving lives, particularly the 4,000 children that have been reported killed already in this conflict. And I think that's what's motivating council members to meet regularly and try and find agreement on the next steps forward. So we are working night and day, and of course there have been a number of diplomatic efforts in parallel in the region. You will have seen the US Secretary of State is in the region. You will have seen a number of other foreign ministers and heads of state heading to the region. I think all eyes are on trying to ameliorate this situation and to prevent wider regional spillover. We are working night and day on it. Too many people have lost their lives, including far too many humanitarian workers and UN workers. The number's almost up to 90 now in a very short space of time. It is tragic, but we are working round the clock to try and do what we can. We're working hard to try and find that agreement, and we're working on numerous levels, including diplomatic levels in capitals. Thank you.
vitamin supplements.
Razan was born exactly a year ago. When she was 6 months old, I realized she wasn't well. Someone from the health center brought us in. Now, thankfully, she's doing better.
But Razan will continue to need medical attention. Her mother isn't in a position to feed her properly. The UN's World Food Program has thousands of tons of food stored here in Darfur. 13 million daily rations are piled high, made up of grain, oil, and pulses. But security is a huge issue. Just 200 kilometers from here, in the city of El Fasher, UN warehouses containing way more food than here were recently plundered.
Okay, that amount of food was taken. What you see here is around 400 metric tons of food. So the 10 times the amount was taken out of our warehouses in El Fasher. Not only that, the warehouses themselves were completely destroyed. So it's critical that the government provides security. Otherwise, we can't deliver this very urgent food assistance to people who need it the most.
The losses have forced the World Food Program to temporarily suspend aid to the whole of northern Darfur. 2 million people are no longer getting food assistance. Militia, former nomads, are believed to be responsible for the swoop. A long-standing conflict has reignited between nomads and farmers over rights to grazing land and water. Since 2003, the crisis in Darfur has claimed 400,000 lives. Militias burned down farms and murdered the inhabitants, driving thousands from their homes. Nearly 2 decades on, many still don't dare to go back. To equip them with the basic skills they would need to return, the World Food Program provides training, teaching them how to grow vegetables, for example.
We didn't have anything at the camp. We couldn't afford anything. That's why we came back. We just wanted to be able to live. Now we're glad we came. We grow tomatoes.
The women earn money from the crops they harvest and sell at market, and also receive financial support until they're self-sufficient. It's an incentive to keep going.
It's only in such conditions that people actually start to return home from being internally displaced and are empowered to have livelihood opportunities, economic opportunities.
So far, though, few are benefiting from this support, and the state barely contributes. Since the military took over the central government last October, prompting mass protests, Sudan has once again been plunged into chaos, so the camps look set to continue. Education can offer an alternative way out of the camp, but it's not easy to come by. The school in the Otash camp is dilapidated. There's no furniture, proper books, or stationery. But Maktoum is about to take an exam. He hopes that one day he'll get to study at university.
Education is a basic right for every child, regardless of the religion or regardless of the shape or the place that they come from. And education is the way that each of us can get skills and tools to change the whole world and have decent life. With education, we can make all our dreams come true.
Maktoum is determined to leave the camp, but most of the young students here in Otash will have to stay. And it's unlikely their dreams will ever come true.
Mangrove forests are found exclusively in tropical regions around the world. They line many coasts, protecting them from erosion caused by the sea. But many forests have already been destroyed for wood used in cooking or for shrimp farms. For our Global Ideas series, we visited the coastal province of Demak on the Indonesian island of Java, where a fundamental shift in thinking has begun.
Time to check the traps. When Abdul Ghaffar empties his nets, his bucket is filled with wriggling shrimp.
My daily yield has increased a lot. Usually I get a daily yield of a half to 1 kilo in normal seasons. But thank God, even in this difficult season, it's more than 3 kilos. So I have a good daily yield.
That wasn't always the case. For centuries,
Fish farmers like Gofur in Demak Regency in the Indonesian province of Central Java have earned their living fish farming. His parents also earned a living with fishing, but Abdul Gofur's generation have seen conditions deteriorate fast.
Petani-petani tambak itu memakai bahan-bahan kimia.
A lot of fish farmers use chemicals, such as urea, pesticides. They were very excessive. When using chemicals, the first results are very encouraging, but they get less good and steadily worsen.
Moreover, many of the mangroves were removed to make way for the shrimp and fish ponds. Up to 40% of Indonesia's mangrove forests have disappeared. The fishers here are learning how important these trees are for aquaculture, under the guidance of scientist Sri Rejeki and her team.
Some of people think that mangrove is only used for firewood or for building materials. But after mangrove gone, they realized that after the beach, the coast is eroded and the Demak area is very suffer from that.
Together with the fishers, Sri Rejeki has been reshaping the ponds. The fish farmers have agreed to construct new levees and systems of locks. By regulating the flow of water, sediment collects in certain places, mangroves grow there naturally. The aim is to create a vibrant green band of mangrove forests to act as a protective barrier between the land and the fish ponds.
This mangrove roots is very important for the ecosystem, especially for the coastal ecosystem. These roots can trap the sediment, so it avoid the erosion, coastal erosion, as well as the river embankment. These roots also have another function because it can absorb the pollutant, including heavy metals.
As a result, the water quality has improved. The natural environment is less intact a bit further west in the Kendal Regency. The remaining mangroves struggle to withstand the increasingly strong tides caused by the warming of the seas. Fish farmer Sutrisno is repairing his pond. It keeps getting destroyed by the flood tides, wiping out his income too.
Of course, mangroves are very helpful for protecting ponds, but the erosion is too strong. We need coastal defenses as well as mangroves. Mangroves could be planted behind the coastal defenses.
In some areas of the region, a lot of planting is going on, thanks to the commitment of Wasito, a former fisher. He's been planting mangroves for over a decade now. At first, the residents ridiculed him, until some coastal strips began to slowly recover from the flooding. Now many people are joining him. He's become a local hero, and he can use the help because time is running out.
Here, many people's ponds have disappeared. The embankments are also no longer there. They've been covered by seawater. This situation needs to get attention from the government and the local residents, especially to maintain this last embankment so it doesn't collapse. If this last embankment collapses, the settlements will be directly affected by erosion.
The Indonesian government supports some mangrove reforesting projects, but not Wasito's. He has a nursery of his own and pays for its upkeep. Back in Demak, Sri Rejeki and the fishers receive funding from universities and private investors. Training also gets financial backing. Abdul Gofur has learned to create organic fertilizer with the help of mangrove leaves. He composes them together with goat dung and seagrass and ferments the mixture. He uses the runoff to keep the bottom of the pond intact and fertile.
Jadi keuntungan saya, alhamdulillah,
I've got a lot of benefits now. I can save money.
bisa menyisihkan
Usually to buy chemicals, now I don't need to buy them anymore.
bahan kimia, tapi nggak usah.
The money can be used for my children's school needs.
A growing number of Indonesian shrimp and fish farmers like Abdul Ghaffar are doing their bit to protect the mangroves rather than deplete them. The farmers are working together with nature.
Exposing young children to excess sugar has its consequences. Around 40 million children under the age of 5 worldwide are considered overweight. That's 1 in 6 in this age group. And overweight children tend to become overweight adults. There are currently more than 2 billion people worldwide classed as overweight, so healthy eating habits should begin early.
Getting to know Mother Earth. Digging, pulling up roots. Getting down in the dirt. All to put food on the table.
The point is to show children that food doesn't just come from the supermarket. This teaches them to love nature and appreciate it.
The children are digging up sweet potatoes. Later, they're going to have what they harvest for lunch. Iko is digging up some taro and finding out that the root vegetable can make your skin itch.
This is the first time I've ever harvested vegetables. It's great fun.
Not all the children are having fun, but it's all a learning experience. Harvest Day at this elementary school in Kodaira, Tokyo is no doubt a nightmare for the cleaning staff. But for teacher Hideko Shirai, it's a huge success. She teaches nutrition. The subject is taught in schools across the country. First, the children take a closer look at the fruits of their labor. Meanwhile, the school is taking a delivery of more fresh produce. It has a contract with farmers on the edge of the city. The school canteen prepares meals for over 600 children every day. Today's lunch will include what the children harvested earlier. The cook discusses the meal plan with the nutrition teacher. The children get balanced meals with carbs, meat or fish, and vegetables. Not the usual school dinners that most adults prefer to forget. When I was at school, the dinners were pretty awful, to be honest. But that was a long time ago, and things have changed. School dinners have improved a lot. The idea is also to introduce the children to new flavors and textures, like this taro stew. But the most important thing is that they enjoy their lunch. Yui is in grade 2. All the children get to do kitchen duty once a month, and today it's her turn. They all have to wear aprons and hairnets. They visibly enjoy themselves. They can't wait to see what the cooks have done with the vegetables they dug up this morning. Lunch is served in the classroom. Today, it's fried rice with vegetables and salmon with grated radish along with the taro stew. The children first express their gratitude for the meal. Then it's finally time to dive in. Obesity rates among children in Japan are lower than in other industrialized nations. Today's meal contains about 600 calories. The children aren't supposed to bring packed lunches from home. They're expected to eat up everything on their plate. In grade 2, everyone does. The stew tastes just right.
I'd like to have this at home too.
Iko, who worked so hard digging up the vegetables, is really happy.
It's great that so many people work hard and the farmers plant tasty vegetables for us.
A standard school dinner in Japan consists of a starch and a protein, vegetable sides, and milk to drink. The teacher posts a photo on the school website along with a list of ingredients and their health benefits. And photos of Harvest Day.
We don't have a like button on the website, but when I talk to parents, they often mention the school dinners. They'll say how interesting it sounded, and so on.
The children express their appreciation for the food. The Garden to Table project is a great success.
That was Global 3000. Do you have any feedback or did you find something particularly interesting? Write to global3000@dw.com or check out our Facebook page, DW Global Ideas. Bye!
If you believe polio is beaten, I ask you to listen.
Public health officials haven't seen anything like it in years.
حالات جديدة من مرض شلل الأطفال.
Every 15 minutes, a child is taken ill with diphtheria.
Las zonas más afectadas por el sarampión.
All these outbreaks are occurring among unvaccinated preschool-aged children.
Measles epidemic is turning into a crisis.
Polio has re-emerged.
شلل الأطفال السرطان.
Measles outbreak.
C'est officiel, la rougeole est massivement de retour sur le continent européen.
La poliomyélite. Poliovirus.
Diphtheria.
Diphtheria disease.
La inmunización es una de las intervenciones de salud más efectivas en toda la historia humana.
Vaccines have eradicated smallpox worldwide.
Éradication de la polio. Nous n'avons jamais été aussi près du but. Це дуже кривавий та жорстокий шлях. Я прошу, зупиніть війну, остановите війну. Please, stop the war.